All right, so this week we're talking about Descartes, who was a French philosopher in the modern period of philosophy. And we'll explain, all of that in more detail, but just roughly um, give you a sense of who we're talking about today. This is René Descartes. He was around from 1596 to 1650, and he made advancements, major advancements in philosophy, but also other fields as well. In philosophy, he was known as both the father of the modern era and sort of the father of the modern rationalist tradition. In addition to all of the philosophical achievements he had, which we'll continue talking about throughout this entire lecture, he was also famous for his developments in math and science. Regarding science, he made a number of advancements in biology, and in mathematics, his developments there sort of changed the entire intellectual landscape of the discipline and were a heavy influence on Isaac Newton. In addition, we're not going to talk about his developments in math, but one thing that you've already used uh, that Descartes' responsible for is the Cartesian coordinate system. So when you were in school, grade school, junior high, even, you use it still probably, if you're still taking math classes. Uh, remember when you were plotting points on the X and Y axis, right? You were using the Cartesian coordinate system there. So you have Descartes to thank for that. Yeah, so good. He was a polymath, which essentially just means he was an expert in a bunch of different fields, right? So he wasn't just dabbling in math, philosophy, and science. He was an expert in each of these fields and made critical developments and advancements in all of these fields. But obviously, we're going to focus on his philosophical advancements. So, as I mentioned, Descartes was a rationalist and sort of known as the father of the modern rationalist tradition. And what rationalism really is just, a seemingly simple claim, right? We have some beliefs that don't require experience for their justification. What does this mean? So it means think about how you justify a belief, right? So you tell me that you believe something, and I ask, well, why do you believe it? Or what's your evidence, right? So you make some claim, and I'll say, what's your evidence for that? How are you going to justify having that belief and claiming that it's true. Right? And many will say, this is sort of common for us, right? We appeal to scientific evidence, right? We appeal to our experience of the world, and we say that's our justification. We have all this scientific evidence that backs up our hypothesis, and so we have this belief that's been confirmed by evidence out in the world. That's how we're justifying it. A rationalist is going to claim that some beliefs don't require us to appeal to our experience, right? So these scientific explanations I was just mentioning, they necessarily are going to require us to appeal to experience at some point in order to justify our belief. But a rationalist will say there's some, it doesn't have to be many, it could only be just one, right? It could be one very important foundational belief, or it could be a set of beliefs. Either way, there's going to be some beliefs in our system or set of beliefs that do not require any experience. So what does that mean? Well, there's a number of ways you can go about it, and we'll talk about these more over the coming weeks, but you might think that some beliefs or ideas are just innate within us, right? So we don't have to experience the world in order to know these. There's just things that we can know. Um, so one thing that many people have thought counts as an innate idea is something like the truths of mathematics, right? So 2 plus 2 equals 4 is something that we can be justified in believing without actually having any experience of it. We can just look at the meanings of the words and come to understand them. And people like Descartes, rationalists, will say we didn't have to first get some experience in order to then make this claim that 2 plus 2 equals 4. We were just able to understand it because we've already sort of just innately have this belief. That's one way a rationalist could go about it. There's many others, but I just wanted to give you an example. Okay, so now that we know Descartes is a rationalist and we know what that means, we can get into his overall philosophy. So, as I already mentioned, Descartes was a famous mathematician, scientist, and philosopher. And so he noticed a big problem, right? He noticed that many of our beliefs, especially our beliefs about the world around us, the external world, the world external to us, uh, many beliefs we have about the external world come to us through science, and science depends very heavily on our ability to perceive, right? So we either see, smell, hear, touch, so on and so forth, and we collect all of this evidence with our senses, which we then use to inform or justify our scientific theories. And Descartes realized very quickly that it seems like our senses are open to doubt. And we'll talk about how they could be doubted in a second, but I mean, just quickly think off the top of your head, right? Your senses deceive you sometimes. And if your senses are deceiving you, that means you can doubt the truth of what they're representing, right? So if your senses have deceived you once, they could be deceiving you multiple times. And that just that tiny level of doubt is enough to say that our scientific evidence is uncertain, right? And he didn't like that. He wanted to make sure that all of this knowledge we have about ourselves and the external world was on absolutely solid ground. And so he was going to do this by using what's known as his method of doubt. So in the first meditation, Descartes is trying now to see if any of his beliefs can withstand doubt, right? So we already talked about how even if there's a little bit of doubt in the way your senses work, that's enough to call everything into question, right? So now he's going to use this method of doubt to see if there's even any beliefs that he has which he knows with absolute certainty. So he just needs to find one thing that he knows that can't be doubted at all. Right? So that's a monumental task, and we'll see why it's so difficult in a second. But now think of yourself here. What are some things that you once thought you knew with absolute certainty, but now you realize are either completely false or at least somewhat open to doubt? And I have some examples here, but you should be able to think of many more, right? So there's all sorts of fictional stories or false information we're given as children. Think of all of the stories of fictional characters or Santa or how babies are made by a stork carrying it in to your parents' house, right? There are a number of things we thought were absolutely true as a child, right? We set cookies and milk out for Santa, not because we thought it was a fictional story. We thought Santa was real. And so we had this belief, and we thought this belief was absolutely certain. We thought this person existed. And then it turns out, not only can we doubt that belief, right? As you start getting older, you start doubting it more and more. It seems impossible for one man to make the rounds of the entire world in a single night, so on and so forth, right? And then you start doubting it, and then eventually you come to realize it's a belief you held, which was just purely false. And so here's a good example of a set of beliefs you had for a long time, right? There was a whole gigantic set of beliefs you had about these fictional characters that turned out to be false beliefs. Now, you might think those were pretty easy to classify and figure out were false, but surely I have a number of beliefs which can't be doubted. But think about think about scenarios like you see in movies like The Matrix or Inception. Right? So you have a belief that you exist. You're living your life in this world, this external world, but it's possible, although it might not be likely, it's at least possible that you're in the Matrix or you're in some type of dream state playing out all of this stuff. And so Descartes even worried about things as extreme as that, right? So you might think it's not very likely that we're in the Matrix, but if there's even a small possibility, that can call all of our knowledge into doubt. And so maybe even beliefs about mathematics, about our own existence, are just as problematic as our fictional beliefs we had as children about fictional characters, right? So he's going to really push this method of doubt, see He's going to push everything to the extreme, take every belief he can think of, and see if it can be doubted. And we'll start really diving into how he questions each bit in the next video.